Hi and welcome to another very exciting tutorial. This tutorial is all about transitioning and handling passing data using SwiftUI, although we cannot really call it passing data, much more updating our UI with new data. So for example, if I enter a channel name here for my channel data or in my channel data view, I can immediately see how my back button really also changes, and we also have this change applied to this first view. So in this case, we are transitioning using a navigation link, and we have all of the data like this Brian Advent or the channel data available through all of the views. As you can see, the channel name is also added to this third view. And as you can see, we're applying a modal transition, which is interactive, by the way, and this comes for free if we're using a sheet like this. So we're talking about transitioning. We're talking about handling data like video title, great content. I can add that right here. And as you can see, this is immediately reflected in my first view. I can also press this dismiss button. Same is true for this view. So the app doesn't look too cool, but we're featuring quite a few very useful techniques that you need to know when you're programming with SwiftUI. So let me give you a better understanding of what we're doing right now. So I said that we were talking about passing data in SwiftUI, but since we're working in a declarative approach, we're much more causing view updates depending on data that changes. So just to give you a very quick introduction into the topic of the difference between imperative and declarative programming, I've done an introduction video to combine and the way SwiftUI really works in a separate video, so I just recommend that. You will find that in the video description below. But just to give you a quick overview, we have imperative programming and we have declarative programming. These are really just mental models. So in an imperative world, and this was the world before SwiftUI for creating user interfaces for iOS and macOS, we have to define how things are done. In a declarative way, we're defining what we want. So just to illustrate it a little bit more, if we want to create mashed potatoes, then as a recipe, we need to specify that we first need to peel the potatoes, we need to cook the potatoes, mash the potatoes, and so on. And at the end, we have our result of mashed potatoes. In a declarative world, what we would do is we would go to a chef and say, please make mashed potatoes. And the chef says, okay, I just do it. So this means, in terms for us, what it means when we're working with user interfaces and data, that we build all possible layouts and all possible states for our user interface first, and then we let SwiftUI update the interface when something changes. So when property changes. And this is called binding, which again is kind of a synchronization between, for example, a UI control and an associated property. Just one quick example, if we have this list here on the right and we toggle this button, then we actually need to update this fafs only bool. And this is done, for example, using state. And we can just use our toggle and association with this state to very much simplify this process. So if you've worked with SwiftUI before, then you have seen this state attribute and this type of property before. And I'd like to give you a cool overview and kind of like a cheat sheet that allows you to decide when to use these kinds of properties. And we'll start with state. As you've seen with our bool, when we're using state, we're using some simple properties, just like string or integer or bool. And these states always belong to a specific view, and they're never used outside of that view, like our favorites example that you've seen just a few seconds ago. This means that it makes sense to also declare them private because they're just used in this view. So the second kind of property that we can use is, for example, observed object. And an observed object, this is cool, can be shared across different views, and we can even use more complex properties and create our own custom types. And since our custom type is an external reference type, we also need to manage this type. We need to create an instance of the class in our view, we need to create our own properties, and the class that we're creating also needs to conform to the observable object protocol. So these are just the technicalities that are important. And in this class, what we can do is we can use the property wrapper published to mark properties that should force a view to refresh. So this is cool. We can use observed object to actually use data across multiple views and pass this object along to decide which view should receive this data. And we are always binding the data together so that updates to the data causes view updates in the user interface, as long as we declare a property using the published property wrapper. And the last property type that I'd like to show you is EnvironmentObject. That is very similar to observed object, but it has the possibility to be made available to all the views throughout your application. And this is a very quick and very easy way to, for example, pass along settings or other kinds of important data that needs to be available in all of your views. And if one view changes the model, all views are updated. So just to summarize that, we have state and we have observed object, and both of these types of properties are set by a view. And in comparison to state, observed object can be shared with other views, and state always belongs to a specific view. And environment object can be set in scene delegate, and we can make it available throughout our whole application. And now to illustrate that a little bit more, let's have a look at this pretty graphic. So let's see, we have a scene delegate. We have 3 views, view A, B, and C. And let's say that we have one data object called settings in our scene delegate, and we can set the environment object of view A and just pass along our settings. So with that done, our view A can have an environment object called settings, and all of the settings properties and methods are available in this view. And we can do the same thing for view B and view C, and we can just change things in our settings in all of these views, and all will stay in sync. And we can use this data in all of our views just by passing it along once in scene delegate and then access it through all of our views as long as they inherit something from the parent views. Let's say we start with view A and we go deeper to view B and go deeper to view C, then this is going to work. If we're working with a modal sheet, then you're going to see how this works in a few minutes. So this is the environment object, pretty cool. And now let's say in our view B, we have a username and a password text field. And in this text, or in this view, we're actually setting that, but we will still need that in our view A. So no problem. We will declare our user data object in view A as an observed object and then pass it along to view B, and again, both will stay in sync. And the last case that we have is our private state variable, which is, for example, a toggle and a bool, and this will stay in view A, and we can only use it in view A, but still it is associated with a UI control, for example, and both the control and the property will stay in sync. Now, with all that knowledge in mind, let's build our demo application with all the transitions and syncing our data. Therefore, I have a little starter project right here. It just sets up the user interface. We have as the first view, we have our content view with the 2 labels and our navigation link button. For add channel, we have a button for add new idea. This is not a navigation link, but just a standard button, and we're going to use a modal transition here with our second view that is going to have our 2 text fields to enter a title and some content idea, and we have our channel view where we can enter a channel name. So very straightforward, and just to outline the next great video idea and the next video title. And what we also have are two model classes. The first one is for a video idea. The second one is for channel data. So let's maybe start with just a very simple transition between our first content view and the second view. And for such a modal transition that we'd like to have, we can just use our button here and add at the end of it a sheet. And as you can see, this requires, if we have a look at that, an isPresented binding to a bool. We do not need the onDismiss and content right here. We're just going to add a closure right after that. But for isPresented, we need to define some kind of bool, and we'll store that in a state. So let's create right on top of our body, just after the definition of our content view struct, a private variable called showing second VC and set this to false. So as you can see, this is a state. Now it's a state. Now it's definitely a state. And we're declaring this as private because we can only use this state in this content view. But it'll hold our bool, and we can pass it along here for our sheet using a $, and is showing second VC property name. And we're using the $, to actually refer to the data itself and not its current value, false or true, because this is required here. And now, when we actually displaying now our second view controller, what we need to think about is what we actually want to happen. Well, when isPresented is set to true, we actually want to have an instance of our second view. So let's create one and initialize that right here. So we have our second view now, but no way to actually display it. Or wait a second, let's set this to true and run this in the simulator for a second. So once we run this, you can see that we immediately get our second view controller right here, and we can also dismiss that. But if we press on Add New ID, nothing really happens, although we have attached this somehow to this button. But displaying this sheet depends on our showing second VC bool that we've declared as a private state property for our content view. This means to actually display our view controller, our second view controller, what we need to do is when we press our button, and this is why we define this as an action right here, we actually need to use our showing second VC property and just toggle this. So just change the Boolean value right here. Now the initial value, let me set that back to false, is going to make sure that our second VC isn't shown yet. And once I press on Add New Idea, this changes. So we're changing this state of our property, and by that SwiftUI changes the user interface. Isn't that cool? So this was the first step. We're now able to transition to our second view controller, and we can also actually transition back by just dragging that down. But we also have this dismiss this VC button right here that you might want to use in different cases, and do not rely on your user to actually know this gesture of swiping that view controller down. To change that, let's go into our second view and let's declare a new property that is called presentation mode. And as you can see, what I've done here is using a property wrapper. And again, if you're not familiar with property wrappers, I recommend watching my video on that, which is linked in the video description below. With this environment property wrapper, we're actually accessing the presentation mode, and the presentation mode with this declaration is an environment binding to the current presentation mode of this view, and we can use it to programmatically dismiss our modal view. And all we need to do now actually in our dismiss this VC button is actually use self presentation mode and then access the wrapped value right here, and then we can just call dismiss, which is going to dismiss the currently presented view. And if we run this now in the simulator, we can expect that we can use both ways. We can add a new title, we can swipe down, but we can also dismiss this view controller with a click or a tap on this button. So this was very simple. We can now transition back and forth between a modal view or use a modal transition for that. And now we also want to actually be able to sync our data. And as you can see, using a navigation link here in our content view, this is just kind of a button that receives the destination, which in this case is the channel view. We add a text, and that gives us the possibility to just transition back and forth, kind of like using a navigation controller. And all of that just comes for free. And now for keeping data in sync, we have already seen the state property, that is in our case showing second view controller, that is responsible for actually displaying our modal view. And we're changing that using the toggle function in our button, and this always stays in sync with showing second VC, and if this updates, we're also presenting our second view controller, or we're actually not presenting it. Now, as for our other data that we can look at, so we actually want to be able to add a channel name. We also want to be able to add a video title and our content idea. And for that, we have two model classes. We have the video idea and we have channel data. And we're going to start with the video idea. And we're going to use an observed object for that. And as you've learned in the presentation, if we want to work with an observed object, we also need to conform our class to the observable object protocol. And for that to be available, I have imported combine to this class. And now we're going to have two properties. We're going to have a title, which is going to be a string, default value is going to be empty, and we're going to have a content idea, which is also going to be a string and empty. And now to actually update the user interface, I'm going to use the published property wrapper for those of these properties, so that every time we change these properties, our user interface is refreshed. And with that done, we are now responsible to also create an instance of this class in our content view, for example. And this is going to be the source of truth for our view. So here, as we have just created an observable object, we're going to declare this as an observed object, which is going to be called video idea. And we're going to initialize it right here with video idea. And this is now the source of truth for this view, and we can pass it along to another view. And this is what we're going to do right now, but we need to prepare our another view or our second view for that. Our second view has at the moment two properties called video title and video content. We no longer need the initial values right here, and we're going to change that to binding, since we're just going to need, or we're not just going to need the content of a string, but a binding, as this is required here for our text fields. And we need to make sure that both of them are actually strings now, since Swift can no longer infer that. And now we have declared them as bindings, and we have added them to our text fields. So our properties will always contain the same data that the specific text field contains. And since those two properties now need to be available in different views, so for example in our content view, because we need to be able to access them in a second, we're going to remove the private declaration right here. And now we can go back to our content view, and as you can see, we already have an error right here because we need to initialize our second view now with a video title and a video content, and both, as you can see, are bindings of type string. So luckily we have that available using self, our video idea, and again we're using the $ here to access the data itself and not its value, and we're using the title, and here for the video content we're using self, $ video idea, and content idea. And now that we have real data to work with, our placeholders for video title and video content are no longer needed. So what we can do is just access the video idea here, getting the title, and again, for the video content, we're using video idea and the content idea. And now in the simulator, if we press on add new idea, we can add a great title. And as you can see, if I swipe down, we already have a great title and some great content. And if we swipe down, we also have some great content. So everything in perfect sync. And we have used observed object to actually use data across different views. Now, we have two cases handled. We have state, we have observed object. So state for working with data just in one single view, observed object for working in two different views. Now, let's see how we can work with data that actually needs to be available in every view, in this one, in the content view, in add channel data, and also in add new idea. So how can we do that? First of all, we already have this great class called channel data that again needs to adopt the observable object protocol. And we will only have one property that is also going to be published, and it's just going to be a channel name, which is going to be a string, or let's just add a default value here. Let's say YouTube channel. And that's it. Now, to actually inject this kind of data throughout our whole application, you've already seen that scene delegate plays an important role. And what we do here in scene delegate is actually creating one instance. So let's create this channel data right here and initialize it as well. And now, since we're creating our content view here, we can call the EnvironmentObject function right here. And this is going to receive an observable object, which in our case is channel data. And with that, we have injected channel data to the first view in our hierarchy. And every time we actually add a new view to this hierarchy, for example, if we press on add channel, this channel will also receive this environment object. Let's see how this works. So first of all, to access the data in our content view, we also need to add an environment object right here. So we have environment object, we call this channel data, and this is of type channel data. And we want to use that in different positions or at different points in our application. For example, for the navigation bar title right here. And here let's use string interpolation to actually just use channel data and the channel name. And once we run this in the simulator, we should have our YouTube channel as the default value, which already happened. So we have this data available in our content view. Now let's go to our second view and let's also create an environment object for our channel data of type channel data. And here what we'd like to do, also use it for the navigation bar title. So let's use string interpolation again. Let's use channel data and channel name right here. And again, if we run this, should be able to see our second view, but it doesn't work. Let's have a look at the information we get in the console. It says fatal error, no observable object of type channel data found. Well, this is because, as I've said earlier, or just mentioned it real quickly, that we're presenting our second view as a modal view. So it is the subview of our content view and therefore doesn't inherit the environment object. So if we still want to use it, what we can do is just pass it along manually using, again, environment object and just pass along our channel data. But here we have to use self because we're within a closure. So once we run this again, now we should be able to see YouTube channel right here. But now the main aspect of our application or of our channel data view or of our channel view is not fulfilled yet, since we cannot really update our view here. So let's first of all maybe go into the second view. Let's copy our presentation mode property here. Let's go into the channel view and paste it right here so that we can also dismiss this channel view with a button. Let's use self and presentation mode, the wrapped value, and just call dismiss. So far, so good. And now, as for our channel name, to actually be able to change that data throughout our application, we need to remove our much more static channel name that is declared as a state, add yet another environment object, which is called channel data, and it is of type channel data, which is very important because this is how Swift infers what we want to use here. And now all we need to do is use self, or actually we don't need to use self here, but we need to use our $, channel data, and channel name. And with that, we have established our binding. We can run this in the simulator, and we can add a channel. Let's say, again, here's my channel name. As you can see, we have the immediate update. We have the channel here. We have also the channel here in our new video idea view. We can have a great title, even better content, can dismiss, and everything is in sync. Now, you have seen a practical approach to different property types like environment object. We have seen observed object, we have seen state, you've seen how to transition modally between two views, you've also seen how easy it is to use a navigation link, what you get for free, how great these actual interactive animations are working, how all of your data stays in sync, and I hope this is going to be useful for you. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it, subscribe to this channel for free to not miss any future tutorials. I thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!